The reservation at Bellacorte was for 8:30, but I arrived 20 minutes early, with a jewelry box burning a hole in my jacket pocket. 15 years of marriage deserved more than dinner at the neighborhood bistro where we usually celebrated. Tonight I wanted perfection. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a view of the harbor that would make Sarah's eyes light up the way they used to when we were young and broke and dreaming of nights like this. I straightened my tie, checked my watch, and wondered if the maître could see the nervous energy radiating off me like heat from asphalt. The diamond tennis bracelet had cost me 3 months of weekend shifts at the construction site, but Sarah had been working 16-hour days as marketing director, climbing ladders I couldn't even see. She deserved something that sparkled as bright as her ambition. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Michael Santos, and at 45 I know the weight of a hard day's work. 22 years in construction management, building everything from strip malls to luxury condos along the Miami coast. My hands are scarred from steel and concrete, my back aches on rainy mornings, but I've never missed a deadline or cut a corner. That's who I am. Reliable. Steady. The kind of man who shows up when he says he will, pays his bills on time and keeps his promises. For 15 years I kept the promise I made to Sarah on our wedding day, to support her dreams even when mine got buried under mortgage payments and overtime shifts. Sarah walked into Bellacorte at exactly 8:30, and for a moment I forgot about the jewelry box, the reservations, everything. She moved through that restaurant like she owned it. Shoulders back, chin high, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my work boots but looked like it was painted on her. The hostess smiled and gestured toward our table, but Sarah barely acknowledged her. She was scanning the room, evaluating, always calculating. That's what made her brilliant at her job. That's also what had been pulling her further away from me with every promotion. When she slid into the chair across from me, her phone was already buzzing. Marcus Williamson, her boss, the CEO of Pinnacle Marketing Group. She glanced at the screen, then at me, conflict flickering across her features. I reached across the table and touched her wrist gently. "Tonight's about us," I said. "Let Marcus wait for once." She hesitated, then powered down the phone and dropped it into her purse. For the first time in months I had her complete attention. The first course arrived, some kind of seafood sculpture that looked too expensive to eat. Sarah picked at it while telling me about her latest campaign, a multi-million-dollar project for a luxury resort chain. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about market penetration and brand positioning, using words that sounded like a foreign language to a man who measured success in square footage and structural integrity. But I listened because her passion was infectious, because seeing her excited made the overtime shifts worth it, because somewhere underneath the corporate jargon was still the woman who used to sketch advertising concepts on napkins in diners where we could barely afford coffee. "There's something else," she said, setting down her fork. "Marcus is announcing it Monday, but I wanted you to hear it first. I'm being promoted to senior vice president, the youngest in the company's history." My chest swelled with pride, the same feeling I got when a building I'd worked on finally stood complete against the skyline. I reached into my jacket pocket, fingers closing around the velvet box. This was the moment I'd planned for, choreographed down to the second course. Before I could speak, a shadow fell across our table. Marcus Williamson stood there in a $1,000 suit that hung on his lean frame like armor, silver heavy, perfectly styled, smile sharp enough to cut glass. He was the kind of handsome that came with money and power, all angles and confidence, the polar opposite of my weathered hands and sun-beaten face. "Sarah," he said, voice smooth as aged whiskey, "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I saw you from across the room and had to congratulate you properly." Sarah's cheeks flushed pink, and she gestured toward me. "Marcus, this is my husband Michael." "Michael, Marcus Williamson." I stood extending my hand, trying not to notice how Marcus's eyes lingered on Sarah's neckline before finally meeting mine. His handshake was firm, practiced, the grip of a man who'd learned to dominate every interaction from boardroom to social club. "The man behind the woman," he said, and something in his tone made my jaw tighten. "Sarah's told me so much about you. Construction, right, building things with your hands, how wonderfully honest." The word landed like a backhanded slap, but I kept my expression neutral. Sarah shifted in her chair, tension rippling across her shoulders. "Marcus was just leaving," she said quickly. "We're having a private celebration." But Marcus wasn't finished. He placed his hand on the back of Sarah's chair, fingers brushing her bare shoulder. The touch was brief, casual, but there was ownership in it that made my blood simmer. Actually, I was hoping to steal her for just a moment. There's someone at my table I'd like her to meet. Potential client, very influential. It'll only take a minute. I felt the jewelry box pressing against my ribs, a physical reminder of the moment slipping away. It's our anniversary, I said, voice steady despite the anger building behind my sternum. 15 years. Maybe business can wait until Monday. Marcus's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. He leaned down, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne, close enough that his words were meant for my ears alone. She's mine now, Michael. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. The restaurant noise faded to static. The crystal glasses, the harbor view, the romantic evening I'd planned, all of it compressed into a single point of rage that threatened to explode behind my eyes. But I didn't move, didn't swing, didn't grab him by his perfectly pressed lapels and introduce his face to the marble floor. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled, not the friendly smile of a man who'd just been insulted, but the cold, calculating smile of someone who'd spent 22 years in construction, who understood that the most dangerous collapses happen slowly, invisibly, one support beam at a time. Enjoy your evening, Marcus, I said, sitting back down and reaching for my wine glass. Don't let us keep you.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He straightened, clearly expecting a different reaction, confusion flickering across his features. Sarah was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. She knew my temper, knew how I reacted when someone disrespected our marriage. But something had shifted in that moment. Something Marcus couldn't see but I felt settling into my bones like concrete finding its form. Marcus recovered quickly, flashing that predator's smile. Sarah, darling, shall we? She looked between us, caught in the crossfire of an undeclared war. Then she stood, smoothing her dress, avoiding my eyes. Just 5 minutes, she whispered, touching my shoulder. I'll be right back. I watched them walk away, Marcus's hand resting on the small of her back with the casual familiarity of a man who'd done it before. They disappeared into the crowd near the bar, where a table full of suits and diamonds held court like modern royalty. I sat alone at our anniversary table, the jewelry box now feeling like a lid weight against my chest. The second course arrived, some kind of duck preparation that the waiter described in loving detail, while I stared across the restaurant at my wife laughing at another man's jokes. Marcus was leaning close, whispering something that made her throw back her head in genuine delight, the sound carrying across the dining room like a blade between my ribs. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The duck grew cold on my plate while I watched Marcus introduce Sarah to his companions, each handshake and air kiss another step away from our table, from our anniversary, from the life we'd built together. When she finally returned, her cheeks were flushed with excitement, and something else I couldn't quite name. I'm sorry, she said, sliding back into her chair, but Michael, this could be huge for us. Marcus introduced me to the Hartwell Group. They're looking for a new agency, and if we land that account, it's our anniversary, I said quietly, cutting through her enthusiasm. 15 years, Sarah, I had something planned. She blinked, as if suddenly remembering where she was, who she was with. Her hand fluttered to her throat, a gesture I recognized from our early dating days when she was nervous or guilty about something. Of course, I'm sorry, what did you want to tell me? I reached into my jacket, fingers closing around the velvet box, then stopped. Across the restaurant, Marcus was watching us, that smug smile playing at his lips, like he knew exactly how this evening would end. Something cold and calculating settled in my chest, replacing the anger with something more dangerous. Purpose? Nothing, I said, leaving the bracelet in my pocket. Let's just enjoy dinner. The rest of the evening passed in stilted conversation and forced smiles. Sarah kept glancing toward Marcus's table, where the laughter was louder, the wine more expensive, the promises brighter than anything a construction worker could offer. When the check came, I paid it without ceremony, tipped generously despite the ruins of my romantic gesture, and helped Sarah into her coat like the gentleman my father had raised me to be. In the parking lot, she kissed my cheek, her lips tasting like champagne she hadn't shared with me. Thank you for understanding about tonight, she said. Marcus says there might be more opportunities if I play this right. We could finally get that house in Coral Gables you're always talking about. I nodded, started the car, and drove us home in silence, while she checked her phone, responding to messages that made her smile in ways I hadn't. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, while Sarah slept beside me, her breathing soft and even. The jewelry box sat on my nightstand, unopened, unwanted, a symbol of something that felt increasingly foolish in the darkness. Marcus's words echoed in my head like a challenge. She's mine now. The arrogance of it, the casual cruelty, the certainty that I would simply accept his claim and step aside like a good little husband who knew his place. But Marcus Williamson didn't know me, didn't understand that 22 years in construction had taught me patience, planning, and the importance of a solid foundation before you start building. He saw a blue-collar husband who would rage and storm and ultimately surrender. What he couldn't see was the man who'd learned that the strongest structures were built slowly, methodically, with attention to every detail and zero tolerance for cutting corners. I got up, walked to my home office, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the darkness as I began to research. Marcus Williamson, Pinnacle Marketing Group, financial records, business partnerships, social media presence, everything available in the digital age where privacy was just an illusion for those who didn't know how to look. Construction had taught me to study blueprints before breaking ground. This wouldn't be any different. By sunrise, I had filled 3 pages of notes. Marcus's divorce 5 years ago, settled quietly but expensively. His previous company, shuttered after accusations of financial irregularities that never quite stuck. The luxury lifestyle funded by investors who trusted his silver tongue more than his track record. And Sarah, brilliant, ambitious Sarah, walking into a trap she couldn't see because the bait was wrapped in promises of everything she'd ever wanted. I closed the laptop as Sarah's alarm buzzed in the bedroom. In a few hours, she would go to work, sit in meetings where Marcus would touch her shoulder and whisper about opportunities, slowly drawing her deeper into his web. And I would go to the construction site, put on my hard hat, and start building something Marcus would never see coming. The jewelry box still sat on the nightstand when I left for work that morning. But I didn't leave empty-handed. In my truck's glove compartment, next to my insurance papers and registration, I placed a small digital recorder I'd bought years ago for work meetings. Old habits from a man who'd learned that the most important conversations were often the ones nobody thought to write down. The Brighton Tower project was entering its final phase, 47 stories of glass and steel that would redefine Miami's skyline. I'd been managing the structural team for 18 months, coordinating with architects, engineers, and city inspectors to ensure every beam, every joint, every connection met specifications that would keep the building standing for generations. It was meticulous work, requiring attention to details that most people never noticed, but that determined whether families came home safe at night. My crew respected me because I never asked them to do something I wouldn't do myself. When we needed to inspect the connections on the 32nd floor, I climbed the scaffolding beside them. When overtime was required to meet deadlines, I worked alongside them until the job was done. Trust wasn't something you demanded in construction. It was something you earned, one decision at a time, one day at a time. During my lunch break, I sat in my truck and called my brother Danny, a private investigator who'd left the Miami Police Department after 20 years to start his own firm. Danny specialized in insurance fraud and corporate investigations, the kind of quiet work that didn't make headlines, but paid the bills, and occasionally put bad people in prison where they belonged. "I need a favor," I said when he answered. "Background check on someone. Deep dive. Everything you can find." Danny's voice carried the skeptical tone of someone who'd seen too much human nature to be surprised by anything. "This about Sarah?" he asked. "I saw you two at the marina last month. She seemed different. Distant." I hadn't realized it was that obvious, but Danny had always been observant. It was what made him a good cop and an even better investigator. "Her boss," I said. "Marcus Williamson, CEO of Pinnacle Marketing. I think he's making a play for her." Danny was quiet for a moment, processing. "You want me to find out if he's done this before?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. "I want to know everything," I said. "Business practices, personal life, where the bodies are buried, and Danny, keep this between us. Family only." "Always," he replied. "Give me a week, maybe 2 if he's buried things deep. But Michael, if you're thinking about doing something stupid, call me first. Prison orange doesn't look good on anyone." I assured him I was just gathering information, which wasn't exactly a lie. Information was the first step in any construction project. You needed to understand the terrain before you started digging. That evening, Sarah came home electric with excitement. Marcus had assigned her to lead the Hartwell Group pitch, a presentation that could make her career and cement her position as the youngest senior VP in company history. She paced around our kitchen, gesturing with wineglass in hand, describing strategy and market research with the passion of someone who'd found her calling. I listened, nodded, asked questions, played the supportive husband while calculating how deep Marcus's hooks had already sunk. "He wants me to present personally to their board," she said, eyes bright with possibility. "It's next Friday, black tie event at the Fontainebleau, all the major players will be there." She paused, studying my face. "You don't seem excited." I forced a smile, the same one I'd perfected at client meetings when contractors tried to sell me substandard materials at premium prices. "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it. "You've worked hard for this." What I didn't say was that Marcus was using her ambition like a master angler uses the perfect lure. Bright, shiny, irresistible, with hooks hidden underneath that wouldn't be visible until it was too late to escape. But Sarah couldn't see that. All she could see was the promotion, the recognition, the life she'd dreamed of since college. She was walking into Marcus's trap with her eyes wide open, and there was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like jealousy or insecurity. After dinner, I excused myself to work on project reports in my office, but instead of construction schedules, I found myself researching corporate law, employment regulations, and the kind of legal precedents that might apply when a CEO crossed ethical lines with an employee. The internet was full of stories, case studies, cautionary tales of powerful men who thought their position made them untouchable until someone proved them wrong. Marcus Williamson thought he was playing chess with a construction worker who didn't know the rules. What he didn't understand was that building required the same strategic thinking as any complex game. You had to anticipate stress points, plan for contingencies, and always have a backup plan when the primary structure failed. And sometimes when a building was too damaged to repair, the only solution was controlled demolition. Over the next few days, I established new routines. I started arriving at work 30 minutes early, using the quiet time to make calls and research. I stayed late, claiming project deadlines while actually diving deeper into Marcus's background. I discovered patterns that made my jaw clench. 3 companies over 15 years, each one more successful than the last, each one leaving behind a trail of talented women who'd started bright and ended up elsewhere, their careers mysteriously derailed just as they reached their peak potential. The Brighton Tower was teaching me patience in ways I hadn't expected. Every morning I watched the sun rise through the skeletal framework of what would become luxury condominiums, offices and retail space. The building grew one floor at a time, one day at a time, each level dependent on the strength of what came before. You couldn't rush structural work, concrete needed time to cure. Steel required precise measurements. Shortcuts led to catastrophic failures that killed people and destroyed reputations. Marcus thought he could rush Sarah, pressure her into compromising positions through ambition and opportunity. He was treating her like a conquest instead of understanding that the strongest foundations were built on respect, trust, and genuine partnership. That would be his first mistake. His second would be underestimating the man who'd spent 15 years earning her love the hard way, through consistent actions rather than empty promises. Danny called on Thursday with preliminary results that made my blood run cold. 3 companies, Michael, same pattern each time. Brilliant woman gets promoted, has an affair with the boss, then either gets pushed out or becomes so compromised she's essentially owned by the company. The last one, Catherine Rodriguez, ended up in rehab after what the records describe as a nervous breakdown, but her sister told a different story off the record. Said Marcus destroyed her professionally and personally when she tried to end things. I gripped the phone tighter. What happened to Catherine? Danny's voice was grim. Suicide attempt. She survived, but her career didn't. She's working as a freelance consultant now, making a fraction of what she was worth. And Michael, the pattern's accelerating. Each relationship gets more intense, more controlling. If Sarah's his next target, she is, I said, watching my wife through the window as she paced the backyard, phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something Marcus was telling her. He's already started. What else did you find? Danny gave me addresses, financial records, a network of connections that painted Marcus as a predator who used corporate structure and legal loopholes to protect himself while destroying the women who trusted him. There's more, Danny continued. I found 2 other women who might talk, former employees who left Pinnacle Marketing under suspicious circumstances. They're both scared, both signed NDAs, but if you could convince them they're not alone, He trailed off, letting me fill in the implications, witnesses, testimony, evidence that could expose Marcus's pattern before Sarah became another casualty. That night, I sat in my truck outside the Pinnacle Marketing Building watching the lights in the executive floors. Sarah was up there somewhere, working late on the Hartwell presentation, believing she was building her career when she was actually walking into a carefully constructed trap. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Going to be late. Marcus wants to review everything one more time. Don't wait up. I typed back good luck and hit send, then immediately hated myself for the lie. There was nothing good about what was happening on those upper floors, nothing lucky about my wife being alone with a man who saw her as his next acquisition. But I couldn't say that without proof, couldn't protect her without revealing my investigation, couldn't save our marriage without potentially destroying everything she thought she was working toward. The jewelry box was still in my nightstand when I got home, unopened, a reminder of the romantic gesture that had died in that restaurant. But beside it now sat a manila folder containing everything Danny had discovered, every pattern, every previous victim, every piece of evidence that Marcus Williamson was not the successful businessman he pretended to be. He was a predator in an expensive suit, and Sarah was walking directly into his territory with her eyes fixed on prizes she couldn't see were poisoned. Friday arrived with the kind of perfect Miami weather that made postcards and convinced tourists to empty their bank accounts on overpriced condos. The Hartwell Group presentation was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the Fontainebleau, giving Marcus the entire day to prep Sarah for what he probably thought would be the culmination of his careful seduction. She'd spent the week perfecting her presentation, working late every night, coming home exhausted but exhilarated by the possibilities Marcus kept dangling in front of her. I watched her get ready that morning with the quiet desperation of a man who knew he was losing something precious but couldn't figure out how to hold onto it without destroying it in the process. She wore a midnight blue dress that hugged her curves like liquid silk, her dark hair swept up to show the elegant line of her neck, diamonds at her ears that caught the morning light like promises of everything she thought she wanted. "How do I look?" she asked, turning to give me the full effect. "Beautiful, successful, like prey dressed for the hunter's table." "Perfect," I said, which wasn't a lie. She was perfect. That was exactly the problem. Marcus specialized in perfect women, collected them like expensive art, displayed them until he grew bored, or they became inconvenient, then discarded them with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never learned that other people had value beyond what they could provide. After she left, I called in sick to the construction site for the first time in 3 years, then drove to a coffee shop in Aventura where Danny had arranged for me to meet Catherine Rodriguez. She was smaller than I'd expected, fine-boned and fragile in a way that suggested she'd been broken and was still learning how to hold herself together. Her hands shook when she lifted her coffee cup, and her eyes darted to the door every few minutes like she was expecting someone to walk in and drag her back to whatever hell Marcus had created for her. "He starts slowly," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Compliments on your work, private meetings to discuss your career, opportunities that other people don't get. He makes you feel special, chosen, like you're the only person in the company who really understands his vision." Her laugh was bitter, broken glass in her throat. "By the time you realize what's happening, you're so deep in his web that leaving feels impossible. Your career, your reputation, everything depends on keeping him happy." "How long?" I asked. Catherine stared into her coffee like it might hold answers to questions she was afraid to ask. 2 years, from the first private meeting to the day I ended up in the hospital. 2 years of slowly losing myself, my ethics, my self-respect. He's very good at making you complicit in your own destruction. Every compromise feels like a choice until you look back and realize you haven't had a real choice in months. The details she shared made me want to drive straight to Pinnacle Marketing and introduce Marcus's face to the nearest wall. But that wouldn't save Sarah. That would just make me feel better while accomplishing nothing productive. Catherine had something better than my rage. She had documentation, emails, texts, recorded conversations, a paper trail that Marcus thought he'd buried under NDAs and legal threats. "I kept everything," she said, pulling a flash drive from her purse. "Every email, every inappropriate text, every recorded conversation where he made it clear that my job depended on my compliance. My lawyer says it's not enough for criminal charges, but it's enough to establish pattern if other women come forward." She slid the drive across the table. "Your wife doesn't have to go through what I did, but she has to want to be saved." That was the heart of it, the thing that kept me awake at night. Sarah didn't think she needed saving, she thought she was winning. Every compliment from Marcus, Every opportunity he dangled, every private moment that felt like recognition was actually another thread in the web he was weaving around her. And the more I tried to warn her without proof, the more I sounded like a jealous husband who couldn't accept his wife's success. I spent the afternoon reading Catherine's files, each document another confirmation that Marcus followed the same playbook with every victim. Identify ambitious women with something to prove, offer them opportunities that seem too good to refuse, gradually increase personal contact under the guise of mentorship, isolate them from colleagues and support systems, create situations where refusing his advances meant career suicide, then exploit that dynamic until they were too compromised to fight back or leave. The pattern was as predictable as it was predatory, and Sarah was currently somewhere in the middle stages, still believing she had control while Marcus tightened the screws around her professional and personal life. The Hartwell presentation wasn't just a career opportunity, it was the moment Marcus would make his final play, confident that Sarah's ambition would overcome any remaining resistance. At 6:30, I drove to the Fontainebleau. The parking lot was full of luxury cars that cost more than most people's houses. A constellation of wealth and power gathered to watch Marcus display his latest conquest. I found a spot where I could see the valet stand and settled in to wait. The digital recorder was charged and ready. My phone had Catherine's number programmed in case I needed backup testimony. Everything was prepared except for the thing that mattered most. Sarah's willingness to see the truth. She arrived at 6:45 in a car I didn't recognize, a sleek black Mercedes that screamed corporate expense account. Marcus was driving, of course, his hand resting possessively on her thigh, as they pulled up to the valet. Even from a distance, I could see the way she leaned into him, the body language of someone who'd already made her choice without realizing she'd made it at all. They walked into the hotel together, Marcus's hand on the small of her back, guiding her like she was his property rather than his employee. I waited 5 minutes, then followed, the recorder in my jacket pocket feeling like a loaded gun. The Fontainebleau's lobby was all marble and gold, designed to make everyone feel like they were part of something exclusive and important. The kind of place where deals were made with handshakes that moved millions of dollars and destroyed lives with equal ease. The presentation was in the hotel's premier ballroom, a space that could hold 300 people but tonight hosted maybe 50 of Miami's business elite. I stayed near the back, just another face in a crowd of suits, invisible to the people who mattered, and completely focused on the woman who still mattered most to me, even as she stood beside the man who was systematically destroying everything we'd built together. Sarah's presentation was flawless. She commanded the room with the confidence of someone born to lead, her slides crisp and compelling, her delivery polished to perfection. For 20 minutes, she was the most important person in that ballroom, and I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with our crumbling marriage and everything to do with witnessing someone I loved excel at what they were born to do. But I also watched Marcus watching her, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood freeze. Ownership, satisfaction. The look of a hunter who'd successfully cornered his prey and was now just waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. Sarah thought she was presenting to potential clients. Marcus knew she was auditioning for a role that would consume everything she was and leave her with nothing but the illusion of success. The presentation ended to enthusiastic applause. Sarah glowed with the kind of professional satisfaction that I remembered from our early years together, when success was still fresh and possibilities felt infinite. Marcus stepped forward, placed his hand on her shoulder, and began fielding questions from the audience with the smooth confidence of someone who owned not just the room but everyone in it. That's when I started recording. During the networking reception that followed, I positioned myself close enough to hear conversations but far enough away to remain invisible. Marcus worked the room like a master conductor, orchestrating introductions and conversations with Sarah as his featured soloist. She was radiant, magnetic, completely unaware that every compliment and connection was designed to make her more dependent on the man who was slowly erasing the boundaries between professional mentorship and personal ownership. "She's quite impressive," I heard one of the Hartwell executives tell Marcus. "Where did you find her?" Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. "I prefer to think that I created her. Sarah had potential, but potential means nothing without the right guidance. She's learned to trust my judgment completely." The arrogance was breathtaking, the casual way he erased 15 years of Sarah's education, experience, and natural talent to paint himself as some kind of Pygmalion figure. But it was the next part that made my finger press harder on the recorder. The best part is how grateful she is. Women like Sarah, they crave recognition so desperately that they'll do almost anything to keep it. And when you're the source of that recognition, he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implication hung in the air like poison gas, and I saw several of the men in his circle nod with the knowing smiles of predators recognizing one of their own. Sarah was 20 feet away, networking with potential clients, completely unaware that her boss was describing her like a possession he'd trained to perform tricks. The evening was winding down when Marcus made his move. I watched him approach Sarah during a lull in conversations, leaning close to whisper something in her ear that made her blush and nod. They excused themselves from the main reception, Marcus guiding her toward a corridor that led to the hotel's private dining rooms. My pulse kicked into overdrive as I followed at a distance, the recorder still running, every instinct screaming that whatever happened next would determine whether my marriage could be saved or was already beyond redemption. The private dining room Marcus led her to was intimate, candlelit, designed for the kind of conversations that required absolute discretion. Through a crack in the partially open door, I could see them at a small table, champagne glasses catching the flickering light, Marcus's hand
covering Sarah's as he spoke in low, urgent tones that I couldn't quite make out from my position in the hallway.
I moved closer, pressing myself against the wall next to the door, the recorder held as close as I dared. Their voices became clearer, and what I heard made me understand that this was the moment Marcus had been building toward for months. The presentation, the networking, all of it had been foreplay, leading to this conversation where he would finally make his intentions clear and force Sarah to choose between her career and her "You were magnificent tonight," Marcus was saying, his voice
carrying the intimate tone of a lover rather than a boss.
"I knew you had it in you, but seeing you command that room, own those people, it was exactly what I've been waiting for." Sarah's laugh was breathless, intoxicated by success and champagne, and the attention of a man who held her professional future in his hands. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "The opportunities you've given me, the faith you've shown, I know how lucky I am, lucky." The word was a knife between my ribs, not because she was wrong, but because she was right for all the wrong reasons. She was lucky Marcus had chosen her as his next victim, instead of someone else. Lucky he was patient enough to seduce her slowly, instead of simply destroying her career when she resisted. "Luck has nothing to do with it," Marcus said, and I heard the sound of chairs moving, footsteps on carpet, the rustle of expensive fabric. "You earned every opportunity through your talent and your trust. Trust is so important in relationships like ours."
Two people understand each other completely when they're willing to do whatever it takes to succeed together. What are you saying, Marcus?
Sarah's voice was smaller now, uncertain, like she was finally beginning to sense the trap closing around her. "I'm saying that tonight changed everything. You proved you're ready for the next level, personally and professionally. The kind of partnership that goes beyond normal business relationships." There was silence, and I could imagine the moment stretching between them, weighted with implications and possibilities, and the kind of choice that would define the rest of Sarah's life. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband is a good man who's given you everything he can," Marcus interrupted, his tone gentle but implacable, "but he can't give you what I can offer. The connections, the opportunities, the kind of success you're capable of achieving. Sarah, you're meant for more than construction sites and middle-class dreams. You're meant to be extraordinary." Another silence, longer this time. I pressed closer to the door, the recorder capturing every nuance of the conversation that was determining whether 15 years of marriage could survive the next 15 minutes. When Sarah spoke, her words hit me like a physical blow. "I've been thinking about us," she said. "About what you mean to me. What we could be together." The admission hung in the air like a confession, and I felt something die inside my chest, some last vestige of hope that I'd been wrong about what was happening between them. "I love Michael, but you're right. He can't understand what I need, what I'm capable of becoming. And you see me in ways he never has." "I see your potential," Marcus replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice, the sound of a hunter whose patience had finally paid off. "I see the woman you could be, if you stopped limiting yourself to what other people think you deserve. Sarah, I'm offering you everything. My partnership, my resources, my complete support. All you have to do is trust me completely." "What about Michael?" she asked, but the question sounded perfunctory, like she was going through the motions of considering her husband's feelings rather than genuinely weighing his importance against her ambitions. "What about our marriage?" Marcus's laugh was soft, almost sympathetic. "Michael will survive. Men like him always do. They find other construction projects, other middle-class dreams to chase, but opportunities like this, partnerships like ours, they don't come along twice in a lifetime." The recorder was still running, capturing every word of the conversation that was destroying my marriage and exposing Marcus for the predator he'd always been. But more importantly, it was documenting the exact moment when Sarah made her choice, when she decided that 15 years of partnership meant less than the promise of corporate success and social climbing. "I need some time to think," she said finally, but her tone suggested the thinking was already done. "This is a big step, bigger than just changing jobs or taking a promotion. This is about changing my entire life." The weight of her words settled between them like a physical presence, and I knew that whatever happened next would determine not just the future of our marriage, but the kind of person Sarah would become when faced with the ultimate test of her character. I backed away from the door, my legs unsteady beneath me, the recorder still capturing the sound of my marriage dissolving in real time. The hallway felt endless as I made my way back to the main lobby, past the marble pillars and gold fixtures that now seemed like decorations in a mausoleum. The valet brought my truck around, and I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the hotel entrance where my wife was deciding whether 15 years of partnership was worth sacrificing for the promise of corporate glory. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and traffic signals, the recorder sitting on the passenger seat like evidence at a crime scene. Everything I'd feared was coming true, but having confirmation didn't make it easier to accept. If anything, hearing Sarah's voice as she contemplated betraying our marriage felt worse than catching them in bed together would have been. At least physical infidelity could be blamed on passion or momentary weakness. What I'd witnessed was calculated, premeditated, the systematic dismantling of everything we'd built together in favor of something that glittered brighter but had no foundation beyond Marcus's manipulations. Our house felt different when I walked through the front door, like returning to a place you'd once called home but that now belonged to strangers. The family photos on the mantel showed a couple I barely recognized, younger versions of ourselves who'd believed in forever and actually meant it. The kitchen still smelled like the coffee Sarah had made that morning, back when she was still my wife instead of Marcus's latest acquisition waiting to be formally claimed. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the recording twice, each playback revealing new layers of betrayal and manipulation. Sarah's voice admitting she'd been thinking about Marcus in ways that had nothing to do with business. Marcus's smooth confidence as he painted her husband as an obstacle to be overcome, rather than a partner to be respected. The easy way they discussed my irrelevance, like I was a piece of furniture they needed to move before redecorating their lives. The jewelry box was still in my nightstand when I finally went upstairs, unopened and now pointless. I'd saved for months to buy something that would celebrate our marriage, on the same day my wife was deciding whether that marriage was worth preserving. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't felt like drowning. Sarah came home at 2 in the morning, moving through the house with the careful quietness of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. I heard her in the bathroom, the sound of running water and expensive skincare products, the routine of a woman preparing herself for whatever came next. When she slipped into bed beside me, she smelled like champagne and Marcus's cologne, a combination that made my stomach clench with nausea and rage. "How did the presentation go?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. She tensed beside me, probably wondering how much I knew, how much I suspected. "It went well," she said finally. "Very well, I think we got the account." The lie came easily, practiced, like she'd been rehearsing it during the drive home. No mention of the private dinner, the intimate conversation, the moment when she'd admitted she'd been thinking about Marcus in ways that had nothing to do with marketing campaigns. "That's good," I replied, staring at the ceiling. "You worked hard for this opportunity." She shifted beside me, her breathing pattern suggesting she was wide awake despite the late hour. "Michael," she said softly. "Yes?" I turned to look at her in the darkness, wondering if this was the moment she'd confess, if some part of the woman I'd married still existed beneath the corporate climber who'd sat in that hotel room discussing my dispensability. "Nothing," she whispered. "Just, thank you. For always supporting my career. I know it hasn't been easy." The words were like salt in an open wound, made worse by the possibility that part of her still meant them. "You don't have to thank me for that," I said. "Partners support each other, that's how marriage works." The silence that followed stretched between us like a chasm, filled with all the things we weren't saying, all the choices that had already been made but not yet implemented. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that made Miami feel like a sauna with a skyline. Sarah left early for what she claimed was a follow-up meeting with the Hartwell group, but I knew better. She was meeting with Marcus, probably to finalize whatever arrangement they'd discussed the night before. The transformation from wife to mistress required paperwork, after all. corporate restructuring of the heart. I spent the morning reviewing Catherine Rodriguez's files again, cross-referencing her experience with what I'd witnessed at the hotel. The parallels were nauseating in their precision. Marcus followed the same playbook with surgical accuracy, each step calculated to maximize psychological leverage while minimizing legal exposure. He was very good at destroying women without leaving fingerprints that could be traced back to him in court, but I wasn't interested in court. I was interested in justice, and sometimes justice required a different approach than what the legal system could provide. 22 years in construction had taught me that when a structure was compromised beyond repair, you didn't waste time trying to shore it up. You brought it down safely and started over with a better foundation. Danny called at noon with more information that painted an even darker picture of Marcus's activities. Found 2 more women, he said, his voice grim with professional disgust, Jessica Martinez and Amanda Chen. Both followed the same pattern as Catherine, brilliant, ambitious, gradually isolated from their support systems, then discarded when they tried to establish boundaries or threatened to go public. Are they willing to talk? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Jessica moved to Seattle and won't return calls. Amanda's in therapy and says she's not ready to relive that period of her life. But Michael, there's something else. I found a connection you need to know about. Danny's pause felt loaded with significance. Marcus has a silent partner in Pinnacle Marketing, someone who provides financial backing in exchange for, let's call them corporate favors. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You're saying this is bigger than just Marcus? Danny's exhale was audible over the phone. I'm saying Marcus isn't just a predator, he's part of a network, rich, powerful men who use companies like Pinnacle as hunting grounds, with Marcus as their procurer. The women aren't just victims of one man's appetites, they're commodities in a system designed to exploit their ambitions and destroy their ability to fight back. I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest, replacing the personal anger with something more focused and dangerous. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about exposing a system that treated women like Sarah as disposable resources for the entertainment of men who believed their wealth made them untouchable. I need names, I said. Everyone involved, everyone who's benefited from what Marcus has been doing. That's going to take time, Danny warned. And Michael, once you have that information, you're going to be a threat to some very powerful people. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I thought about Sarah in that hotel room, admitting she'd been thinking about Marcus while sitting next to her wedding ring. I thought about Catherine Rodriguez, broken and medicated, trying to rebuild a life that Marcus had systematically destroyed. I thought about Jessica and Amanda, and all the other women whose names I didn't know but whose stories followed the same tragic arc. I'm sure, I said. Get me everything. I don't care how long it takes or how dangerous it gets. These people need to face consequences for what they've done. Danny was quiet for a moment, probably calculating the risks and potential outcomes. All right, he said finally. But we do this smart, professional. No vigilante justice, no matter how good it might feel. We build a case that can't be ignored and can't be buried under legal technicalities. That afternoon I drove to a storage facility in Hialeah and rented a climate-controlled unit under a fake name Danny had provided. The space was small, anonymous, perfect for the kind of documentation project I was planning. I brought file cabinets, a scanner, a laptop that had never been connected to my home internet, and enough supplies to wage a war on paper. If Marcus and his network thought they could hide behind corporate structures and legal immunity, they were about to learn that some foundations could be undermined from below. The first thing I did was create a timeline of Marcus's career, mapping each company he'd worked for against the women who disappeared from those organizations. The pattern was consistent and damning. Every 18 months, like clockwork, a talented woman would join his inner circle, receive rapid promotions and special attention, then either leave suddenly or suffer a dramatic decline in performance that led to termination. Catherine had been right about Marcus's patience. He didn't rush the process because rushing created witnesses and evidence. Instead, he took his time, building trust and dependency before gradually escalating his demands. By the time his victims realized what was happening, they were too compromised professionally and emotionally to fight back effectively. Sarah was currently in the trust-building phase, still believing she had agency in a relationship that was actually a carefully constructed trap. Marcus was letting her think she was making choices when every option he presented led to the same destination. Her ambition, the very quality that made her exceptional at her job, was being weaponized against her by someone who understood exactly how to exploit her deepest desires and fears. Sunday evening brought her home with the glow of someone who'd spent the day being told she was special, chosen, destined for greatness. She moved through our house like a woman who was already mentally packing for a different life, touching familiar objects with the distant fondness of someone preparing to leave them behind. During dinner she talked about the Hartwell account, the opportunities it would create, the doors it might open, but her words felt rehearsed, like she was practicing explanations she'd need to give later. Marcus thinks I should consider relocating to New York, she said over dessert, the words delivered with studied casualness. The company's expanding, and he wants someone he trusts to oversee the new office. The announcement landed between us like a grenade with the pin pulled, and I could see her watching my reaction from behind a mask of professional excitement. New York's expensive, I said, keeping my voice neutral, and far from everything we've built here. She nodded, but her expression suggested she'd already calculated the costs and decided they were acceptable. It would be a sacrifice, she admitted. But Marcus says the position could lead to a partnership track, real ownership in the company, not just a salary. Partnership. The word was another manipulation, designed to make her feel like an equal participant in what was actually her systematic exploitation. Marcus was very good at packaging ownership that came with invisible shackles, the kind of golden handcuffs that felt like jewelry until you tried to take them off. What would happen to us? I asked, though we both knew the answer. Would I sell the business, move to New York, start over at 45? The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of questions she'd already answered in private conversations I wasn't supposed to know about. I don't know, she said finally, but her tone suggested she did know and was simply working up the courage to say it out loud. This is the kind of opportunity that only comes once in a lifetime, Michael. I can't let fear hold me back from becoming everything I'm capable of being. Fear? She'd reframed our 15-year marriage, our shared history, our mutual commitment as fear rather than love, sacrifice or partnership. Marcus had taught her to see our relationship through the lens of limitation rather than foundation, and she'd internalized his perspective so completely that she could sit across from me at our own dining room table and describe our life together as an obstacle to her personal growth. I see, I said, and meant it more than she realized. I saw Marcus's manipulation in her word choice, his influence in her body language, his agenda in her sudden willingness to uproot everything we'd built together. I also saw something else, something that made my chest tight with a grief that felt like drowning. I saw that the woman I'd married was disappearing, consumed by someone who'd convinced her that ambition and love were mutually exclusive. Monday morning brought news that Marcus had officially landed the Hartwell account, with Sarah receiving credit for the successful presentation. Her phone rang constantly with congratulations from colleagues and industry contacts, each call reinforcing the narrative that she was a rising star whose trajectory had no limits. I watched her field the calls with growing confidence, saw her starting to believe her own press releases, and recognized the exact moment when Marcus's conditioning shifted from external validation to internal conviction. By Tuesday she was talking about the New York opportunity like it was inevitable rather than optional, discussing logistics and timelines with the excited energy of someone planning a dream vacation. She'd moved from considering Marcus's offer to implementing it, and I realized that whatever conversation they'd had over the weekend had sealed a deal that went far beyond geography or career advancement. That afternoon I received a package at the storage unit containing the most damaging evidence Danny had uncovered yet. Financial records showing payments from Marcus's silent partner to accounts linked to the women who'd disappeared from his orbit. Not salaries or consulting fees, but irregular transfers that looked suspiciously like hush money or compensation for services that weren't listed in any official corporate documentation. The amounts were substantial enough to change someone's life and modest enough to avoid triggering automatic reporting requirements. Jessica Martinez had received $47,000 spread across 6 payments in the 3 months after leaving Pinnacle Marketing. Amanda Chen had gotten $38,000 deposited into an account she'd opened specifically to receive the funds. Catherine Rodriguez had refused all payments, which explained why Marcus had worked so hard to destroy her career and reputation. But it was the final document in Danny's package that made my hands shake with rage. A contract template, professionally drafted legal language that formalized what Marcus had been doing informally for years. The document was titled Executive Development Partnership Agreement and laid out terms that sounded like career mentorship but were actually structured prostitution with corporate benefits. The agreement specified exclusive professional relationship expectations, discretionary personal availability requirements, and confidentiality obligations that extended far beyond normal employment law. It was a contract for sexual servitude dressed up in business terminology, and according to Danny's notes, similar documents had been found in the files of 3 different law firms that specialized in protecting high-net-worth individuals from embarrassing revelations. Sarah was walking into a trap that was far more sophisticated and legally protected than I'd initially understood. Marcus wasn't just a predator. He was the front man for a network of wealthy men who'd systematized the exploitation of ambitious women, complete with legal frameworks designed to make resistance impossible and exposure career suicide. Wednesday brought the announcement that Sarah would be taking a temporary assignment in New York starting the following month with the possibility of permanent relocation depending on how the expansion proceeded. She delivered the news over breakfast with the bright enthusiasm of someone who'd convinced herself this was what she'd always wanted, but I could see the underlying tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when she talked about the timeline. "It's only for 6 months initially," she said, buttering toast with unnecessary precision. "Just to get the office established and train the initial staff. After that we can evaluate whether it makes sense for me to stay permanently." The word "we" was interesting, since it was clear the evaluation had already been completed and my opinion wasn't part of the calculation. "6 months is a long time," I said, watching her reaction. "Will you be coming home on weekends?" She hesitated, a tell I recognized from our early dating days when she was trying to figure out how to break bad news gently. "Marcus thinks it's important for me to be fully integrated into the New York business community, networking events, client dinners, that sort of thing. It might not be practical to travel back and forth every week." Translation: Marcus would be keeping her busy with activities that consolidated his control while making it impossible for her to maintain connections that might remind her who she used to be. Isolation was a classic technique, and she was walking into it with her eyes wide open because he'd convinced her it was career advancement rather than emotional imprisonment. That evening I sat in the store unit reviewing everything I'd collected over the past 2 weeks. Financial records, recorded conversations, victim testimonies, legal documents, and a growing network of connections that painted Marcus as the center of a web that extended far beyond pinnacle marketing. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, and completely useless as long as Sarah remained convinced that Marcus was her salvation rather than her destroyer. I needed something more immediate, more personal, something that would shatter her illusions before she boarded a plane to New York and disappeared into a life that would consume everything she'd once been. The recording from the hotel was devastating, but she could rationalize it as a moment of confusion or claim it was taken out of context. I needed Marcus to reveal himself so completely that even Sarah couldn't ignore what he really was. Thursday morning, I called in another sick day and drove to Pinnacle Marketing's headquarters, a glass tower in Brickell that projected the kind of sleek success that impressed clients and intimidated competitors. Sarah's car was in the executive parking garage, along with Marcus's black Mercedes and several other luxury vehicles that belonged to the senior staff. I found a coffee shop across the street with clear sightlines to the building entrance and settled in to wait. The plan was simple in concept but required precise timing and execution. I needed to create a situation where Marcus felt threatened enough to drop his careful facade and reveal his true nature in a way that Sarah couldn't rationalize or ignore. The man I'd heard in that hotel room was arrogant, possessive, and convinced of his own invincibility. Those traits were weaknesses that could be exploited if approached correctly. At 11:30, Sarah emerged from the building alone, heading toward a restaurant 2 blocks away where she'd probably been sent to meet clients or scout locations for corporate events. I waited until she was out of sight, then crossed the street and entered the Pinnacle Marketing lobby, my construction management credentials and confident getting me past security without questions. Marcus's office was on the 37th floor, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of Biscayne Bay. His assistant was at lunch, her desk abandoned except for a half-eaten salad and a computer screen showing Marcus's calendar for the day. I could see him through the glass wall of his inner office, speaking animatedly on the phone while gesturing at documents spread across his desk. I knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission, the digital recorder in my jacket pocket already running. Marcus looked up with the irritated expression of someone unaccustomed to being interrupted, his perfect smile faltering when he realized I wasn't a colleague or client. "Michael," he said, recovering quickly. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I replied, closing the door behind me and taking a seat across from his desk without being invited. I wanted to discuss Sarah's new position in New York. As her husband, I think I deserve to understand exactly what this opportunity entails. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with the calculated assessment of a predator trying to determine if I posed a threat or merely an annoyance. Sarah's very talented, he said carefully. The New York expansion requires someone with her skills and dedication. I'm sure you're proud of her success. The words were polite, professional, completely devoid of the possessive intimacy I'd heard in his voice at the hotel. He was back in public mode, wearing the mask of respectability that had fooled so many people for so many years. I am proud of her, I said. 15 years of marriage, and I've supported every step of her career. That's what partners do for each other: support, protect, make sacrifices when necessary. I let the words hang in the air, watching his reaction. I imagine you understand the importance of partnership, given your business experience. Something flickered behind his eyes, a momentary crack in the facade that suggested he was beginning to understand this wasn't a casual conversation. Of course, he said. Partnerships require trust, mutual benefit, clear understanding of expectations. His tone was still controlled, but I could see tension building in his shoulders. Exactly, I agreed. Which is why I wanted to discuss Sarah's new arrangement directly with you, man to man, so there are no misunderstandings about boundaries or expectations. Marcus's smile became strained, the kind of expression someone wore when they realized they were being challenged but couldn't figure out the exact nature of the threat. I'm not sure what you mean, he said, but his voice carried a note of wariness that hadn't been there moments before. Sarah's assignment is purely professional. Standard corporate expansion, establishing new markets, developing client relationships, nothing that should concern her husband. Nothing that should concern her husband. I repeated thoughtfully. That's interesting phrasing. Almost like you're suggesting there might be things about Sarah's new position that would concern her husband if he knew about them. Marcus's face tightened, and for just a moment, I caught a glimpse of the man who'd sat in that hotel room describing women as acquisitions to be managed and controlled. I think you're misunderstanding the nature of business relationships, he said, his voice cooling several degrees. Sarah is a valued employee who's earned an important opportunity through her talent and hard work. If you're suggesting something inappropriate, you're not only wrong but potentially damaging to her career. There it was, the first hint of the threat that lay beneath his polished exterior. Cross him, question him, interfere with his plans, and Sarah would pay the price professionally. It was the same leverage he'd used on every woman who challenged him, the implicit understanding that resistance meant career destruction. But he'd made a critical error in calculation. He'd assumed I cared more about Sarah's career than about her safety. I'm not suggesting anything, I said calmly. I'm stating facts based on direct observation. I was at the Fontainebleau Friday night. I saw how you looked at my wife, heard how you talked about her to your colleagues. I know exactly what kind of partnership you're offering, and it has nothing to do with marketing campaigns. The mask slipped completely for a fraction of a second, revealing the cold fury beneath Marcus's professional demeanor. When he spoke again, his voice carried the edge of someone accustomed to having his will obeyed without question. You're walking on very dangerous ground, Michael. Sarah's future depends on her ability to maintain professional relationships and meet the expectations of her position. If you do anything to jeopardize that, you'll destroy more than just her career. Is that a threat? I asked, letting him hear the steel in my own voice. Because if you're threatening my wife's safety or well-being, we can settle this right now man to man, without involving corporate lawyers or HR departments. Marcus stood up slowly, his height and expensive suit designed to intimidate, but 22 years of construction work had taught me that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones who looked least threatening. It's not a threat, he said with the careful diction of someone choosing words that wouldn't sound incriminating on a recording. It's simply an observation about cause and effect. Actions have consequences, especially when they interfere with carefully developed business relationships. Sarah understands that. I hope you do too. The arrogance was breathtaking, the casual way he discussed destroying my wife's career if I didn't step aside and let him proceed with whatever plans he'd made for her. But more importantly, he'd just confirmed everything I'd suspected about his methods and motivations. The recording device in my pocket was capturing every word of a conversation that revealed Marcus's true nature with devastating clarity. I understand perfectly, I said, standing to leave. I understand that my wife is walking into a situation that has nothing to do with business expansion and everything to do with your personal appetites. I understand that you've done this before with other women, and I understand that you think your money and position make you untouchable. Marcus's face went pale, the kind of color change that indicated real fear rather than momentary discomfort. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "And if you repeat these baseless accusations to anyone, you'll find yourself facing legal consequences that will destroy everything you've worked to build." The threat was explicit now, no longer hidden behind corporate doublespeak, and I smiled with genuine satisfaction as the recorder captured every syllable. "Legal consequences," I repeated thoughtfully, "from the man who spent years exploiting women through carefully structured contracts that sound like business arrangements but function like sexual servitude. Tell me, Marcus, do your lawyers specialize in silencing victims, or do you handle that part of the operation personally?" His face went from pale to gray, and I knew I'd hit the target with surgical precision. Marcus had built his entire operation on the assumption that his victims would be too isolated, too compromised, and too afraid to fight back effectively. The possibility that someone had been investigating his network, documenting his methods, and building a case against him was clearly a scenario he'd never prepared for. "Get out," he said quietly, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Get out of my office, get out of my building, and stay away from Sarah. If you interfere with her career or her future, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The threat was explicit, recorded, and completely incriminating. Marcus had just provided evidence of his willingness to retaliate against anyone who challenged his control over the women he'd targeted. "I'll stay away from Sarah," I said, walking toward the door, "but not for the reasons you think. I'll stay away because I want her to see exactly what she's choosing when she picks you over 15 years. And Marcus, when she finally understands what you really are, when the contracts and NDAs and legal threats start flying, remember that you had a chance to walk away from this cleanly and chose escalation instead." I left him standing in his corner office, surrounded by the symbols of success that he'd built on the broken careers and shattered lives of women who trusted him. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt like descending from a crime scene, and in many ways, that's exactly what Marcus's office was. A crime scene where predators wearing expensive suits committed acts of psychological violence with the same casual efficiency that other businesses sold insurance or managed investment portfolios. The recording was devastating, but it was still just one piece of a larger puzzle that needed to be assembled carefully if it was going to bring down Marcus and his entire network. I drove back to the storage unit, uploaded the audio files to encrypted servers Danny had set up, and began the process of connecting Marcus's threats to the pattern of retaliation that had destroyed the careers of women who challenged him in the past. Catherine Rodriguez had tried to expose him and ended up in the hospital. Jessica Martinez had fled to Seattle and refused to discuss her experience. Amanda Chen was in therapy, still struggling to rebuild her sense of self-worth. The women who'd signed his contracts and played by his rules had received financial compensation but lost their professional independence. The ones who'd fought back had been crushed so completely that they served as warnings to anyone else who might consider resistance. Sarah was walking into this system with her eyes closed, convinced that Marcus represented opportunity rather than exploitation. The recording from his office would shatter that illusion, but only if she was willing to listen to evidence that contradicted everything she'd been taught to believe about her brilliant career advancement and the mentor who'd made it possible. Friday arrived with the weight of impending catastrophe. Sarah would be leaving for New York in 10 days, her life already mentally relocated to a city where Marcus's influence was absolute, and his network of powerful allies could ensure that anyone who challenged him faced consequences that extended far beyond professional retaliation. If I was going to save her, it had to happen soon, and it had to happen in a way that left no room for rationalization or denial. That evening, I made a decision that would either save my marriage or destroy it completely. I waited until Sarah was in the shower, then took her phone and sent a text message to Marcus using her contact information. "Having second thoughts about New York. Need to talk privately about the real expectations for this position. Can you meet me tomorrow afternoon somewhere discreet?" The response came within minutes, confirming what I'd suspected about the true nature of Marcus's interest in my wife. "Of course, darling. My penthouse at the Mandarin Oriental, 3 p.m. We can discuss anything that's troubling you." The casual endearment, the immediate availability, the suggestion of his private residence rather than a professional meeting space all painted a picture of a relationship that had already crossed boundaries Sarah hadn't admitted to herself. I deleted both messages from her phone and spent the rest of the evening planning the confrontation that would either expose Marcus for what he was, or provide him with the opportunity to destroy my wife's career and reputation with the ruthless efficiency he'd perfected over years of practice. Either way, the waiting would be over, and Sarah would finally have to choose between the fantasy Marcus had constructed and the reality of what accepting his offer would actually cost her. Saturday morning arrived gray and humid, the kind of weather that made Miami feel like a punishment rather than a paradise. Sarah was unusually quiet during breakfast, picking at her food while scrolling through emails that probably contained instructions from Marcus about their afternoon meeting. I watched her from across the kitchen table, memorizing the details of her face, wondering if this would be the last morning we shared as husband and wife or the first morning of our recovery from his manipulation. At 2:30 I parked outside the Mandarin Oriental and prepared for the most important conversation of my marriage. The recording device was charged and ready. Danny was standing by with backup documentation if needed. Everything was in place except for the one variable I couldn't control: whether the woman I'd married still existed somewhere beneath the corporate climber who'd been seduced by promises of power and prestige. The elevator ride to Marcus's penthouse felt like ascending to execution, and in many ways that's exactly what it was. Someone's future was about to die in that luxury apartment overlooking Biscayne Bay. The only question was whether it would be Marcus's criminal enterprise or my marriage to the woman who'd become his latest victim. The penthouse door opened to reveal Marcus in casual clothes, his usual corporate armor replaced by silk and confidence. He expected Sarah. Instead, he found me holding a recorder that had captured everything I needed. His face shifted from anticipation to fury as realization dawned. The game was over before it began. Sarah arrived 10 minutes later, finding Marcus and me in his living room surrounded by printed emails, financial records, and testimony from his previous victims. She stared at the evidence scattered across his marble coffee table, her corporate dreams crumbling as the truth emerged from carefully constructed lies. Marcus tried damage control, his silver tongue spinning explanations that sounded reasonable until compared against documented patterns spanning 5 companies and dozens of women. Sarah read Catherine's statement, listened to the hotel recording, watched Marcus's mask slip completely as he realized his network was exposed. The confrontation lasted 3 hours. Sarah oscillated between denial and horror as each piece of evidence demolished another pillar of the fantasy Marcus had constructed around their relationship. By evening she understood that her promotion, the New York opportunity, everything had been bait in an elaborate trap. Marcus's final play was threatening legal action, but Danny had already shared our evidence with federal investigators interested in corporate corruption and human trafficking. The penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay became Marcus's prison as he realized his victims were no longer isolated, silent, or afraid. Sarah drove home in stunned silence while I followed in my truck, both of us processing the wreckage of illusions that had nearly destroyed our marriage. The jewelry box waited on our nightstand, unopened but no longer irrelevant. Some gifts survived betrayal, some marriages proved stronger than manipulation. Monday brought news that Marcus had resigned from Pinnacle Marketing pending federal investigation. Sarah took indefinite leave, using the time to rebuild trust with herself and me. The network he'd served crumbled as victims found courage to speak publicly, their collective voices finally louder than legal threats. Catherine Rodriguez called to thank me for proving she wasn't crazy or alone. Jessica returned from Seattle to testify. Amanda emerged from therapy ready to reclaim her story. Marcus's empire of exploitation collapsed under the weight of truth he'd spent years trying to bury beneath corporate respectability. The storage unit became evidence for prosecutors building a case that would reshape how corporate misconduct was prosecuted. Marcus faced charges ranging from extortion to human trafficking, his wealth and connections suddenly inadequate against documented proof of systematic predation spanning multiple jurisdictions and federal crimes. Sarah and I attended therapy together, working through betrayal, manipulation, and the question of whether ambition and love could coexist without destroying each other. Progress was slow but steady, built on honesty rather than the comfortable lies that had made our marriage vulnerable to Marcus's influence. The Hartwell Group withdrew their contract from Pinnacle Marketing when news broke about Marcus's activities. Sarah's presentation had been brilliant, but her association with his criminal enterprise made her radioactive in corporate circles. She started her own consulting firm, building success on merit rather than manipulation. 6 months later, I finally gave Sarah the tennis bracelet, not as celebration of an anniversary that had nearly ended our marriage, but as recognition of who we'd become after surviving someone else's attempt to destroy us. She wore it to Marcus's sentencing, where he received 15 years for crimes spanning 2 decades. The federal investigation expanded beyond Marcus to include his silent partners and the network of wealthy men who'd funded his operations. Dozens of women came forward with stories that followed identical patterns, their collective testimony exposing a system of exploitation that had operated with legal immunity for years. Sarah testified before Congress about corporate structures that enabled predators, her experience becoming part of legislation designed to protect ambitious women from systematic exploitation. Her voice carried weight earned through survival rather than granted through manipulation, and she used that platform to ensure Marcus's story became a warning rather than a blueprint. Our marriage survived because we chose transparency over comfort, justice over convenience, and each other over the promises of people who mistake manipulation for mentorship. The house in Coral Gables we dreamed of buying remained a dream, but the foundation we built proved stronger than any structure Marcus could construct. The Brighton Tower project was completed on schedule, standing 47 stories above Miami as testament that some things are built to last. Like marriages that survive betrayal, like women who refuse to stay silent, like justice that arrives slowly but strikes with the precision of a perfectly planned demolition. Marcus appealed his sentence from federal prison, his legal team arguing that his victims had been willing participants who'd benefited professionally from their relationships. The appeals court rejected his arguments unanimously, noting that consent obtained through professional coercion was not consent at all but a form of extortion dressed in corporate language. Sarah received job offers from competitors who admired her courage in exposing Marcus's network, but she declined them all, preferring the independence of building something from scratch rather than joining organizations that might harbor similar predators. Her consulting firm specialized in ethical corporate practices, teaching companies how to recognize and prevent the kind of exploitation Marcus had perfected. The penthouse at the Mandarin Oriental was seized as part of Marcus's criminal forfeiture, sold at auction with proceeds distributed among his victims as partial restitution for careers and lives he'd damaged. Sarah received a check for damages but donated it to organizations supporting women in corporate environments who faced similar predation. Danny's investigation expanded into a book documenting how wealthy men used corporate structures to systematically exploit women, with Marcus's network serving as the primary case study. The book became required reading in business schools, ensuring that future executives understood the legal and ethical boundaries that Marcus had spent his career erasing. Catherine Rodriguez returned to marketing, her career rebuilt through Sarah's consulting firm and the network of survivors who supported each other through recovery and renewal. Jessica Martinez moved back to Miami, no longer afraid of Marcus's retaliation. Amanda Chen became an advocate for corporate accountability, her therapy sessions transformed into advocacy training. The anniversary dinners Sarah and I shared after Marcus's conviction were quiet affairs, celebrated at home rather than expensive restaurants where predators might be sizing up their next victims. We'd learned that some celebrations were too precious to share with strangers, too meaningful to risk contamination by people who mistake power for worth. Years later, when Marcus was eligible for parole, every one of his victims appeared at the hearing to ensure he remained imprisoned. Sarah spoke last, her words carrying the authority of someone who'd transformed trauma into purpose. The parole board denied his request unanimously, citing continued danger to society. The jewelry box that had sat unopened on our anniversary night became a symbol of second chances and renewed commitment. Sarah wore the bracelet to speaking engagements where she taught other women to recognize manipulation disguised as mentorship, ensuring that Marcus's techniques would be recognized and rejected by future generations. Our marriage evolved from partnership built on traditional roles to collaboration based on shared experience and mutual respect. We'd both been changed by our encounter with Marcus's predation, scarred but strengthened by the process of exposing his network and rebuilding our relationship on foundations that couldn't be undermined by manipulation. The construction business thrived as word spread about my role in exposing corporate corruption. Clients appreciated working with someone who'd proven that integrity mattered more than profit, that some foundations were worth fighting to preserve even when powerful people tried to undermine them through systematic exploitation and legal intimidation. Marcus died in federal prison 5 years into his sentence, his death attributed to complications from diabetes that his wealth could no longer treat adequately. None of his victims attended the funeral, but several sent donations to organizations supporting women who face corporate predation, ensuring his legacy became prevention rather than inspiration for similar crimes. The network he'd served was dismantled piece by piece as investigators followed financial trails and witness testimony to expose the full scope of the operation. Dozens of wealthy men faced prosecution for their role in funding Marcus's activities, their social standing and corporate positions providing no protection against documented evidence of criminal conspiracy. Sarah and I renewed our wedding vows on the 15th anniversary of our original ceremony, the date chosen deliberately to reclaim what Marcus had tried to corrupt. The ceremony was private, attended only by family and the women whose courage had helped expose his predation, their presence a reminder that some victories required collective action. The Brighton Tower still stands in downtown Miami, its 47 floors a monument to the patience and precision required to build structures that last, like marriages that survive betrayal, like justice that arrives slowly but strikes with surgical accuracy, like women who refuse to let predators define their worth or determine their futures through manipulation disguised as opportunity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.